everybody. This is County Assessor Jake Zimmerman, and this is his team, and he's here to answer questions about property values and just whatever questions you have that he can answer. We're going to get ready real quick and pass around some pieces of paper for those of you that might not feel comfortable raising your hands and asking questions. So we'll get started with that in a second. Megan's passing them around with pencils. But other than that, I'll give it to Jake and let him take over. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Jake. I'm the St. Louis County Assessor, which is another way of saying that there are 3 countywide elected officials, and I am number 3. So I will do my best to be sensitive to what's in my pay grade and what ain't in my pay grade, and avoid putting on my politician hat and speaking to broader issues beyond the scope of why I'm here. But what I want to do is I want as much as possible to be able to answer any questions whatsoever that you all have regarding the assessment process, regarding property values, impact of everything that's been going on in the community, what we think the future may hold, and just be as open and transparent as possible. So to that end, I'm again going to restrain my politician instincts, and I'm going to try to not blather on for too long here. And I will spare you the long version of my usual speech, and we'll address issues as they come up in questions. Let me just take a few minutes. Let me give you the sort of quick overview version of who we are, what we do, why it matters, and then just talk very briefly about specifically the implications / impact in terms of questions about property values in the Bridgeton landfill vicinity. And by way of introduction, this is my deputy assessor, Crystal Atkinson. She's also our director of external affairs, so she's our primary point of contact for community questions and questions from community leaders and so forth. And she's been in contact with a number of people from this organization, and she will continue to be our point of contact. And then also here with me is Dave Godar. Dave is one of our senior residential appraisal managers, and he's a long-time employee of the office, predating me and Crystal by a mile, and so he has significant residential appraisal expertise that the guy wearing the suit up here doesn't necessarily have. So to the extent that anyone does have technical questions, he'll be available to answer them. And then we should also have cards here for our constituent services and customer service manager, Laura Estes, so that everyone can have her contact information. To the extent that people have individual questions about your personal property, your neighbor's property, something that we can't address here in a forum where we're talking about general issues, I want everyone to feel free to directly be in contact with Laura if you have questions about your property or how to handle it in the context of our process. So anyway, I run an office of about 150 people, and the assessor's office's job is to identify and value all real and personal property in St. Louis County. That is a fancy way of saying our job is to figure out where the stuff is and figure out what the stuff is worth. Real property is the kind of stuff that sits on the ground and doesn't move. This building is real property. Personal property is any other kind of property that moves around. So your car is personal property, the building is real property. So our job is to find the stuff and to figure out what it's worth. Finding the stuff tends to be only an issue to the extent that people like to cheat or game the system and want to hide the stuff. Examples of that would be private airplane owners who don't like paying taxes and try to cheat the system by pretending that their airplane isn't there. So it's our job and our responsibility to find those people and make sure they pay personal property taxes, just like you do on your car, for example. Also identifying the stuff falling into that category would be making sure that no one is claiming that their stuff is exempt from taxation when it shouldn't be, making sure no one is pretending to be a charity when they're not. You may have seen some news coverage about the work we've done there. Happy to answer questions and all that other stuff, but it doesn't really relate to our topic here tonight, so I'll leave it at that. Valuing the stuff. Obviously, that's the bulk of what we do. And a common misconception is that people think that what we're about is the property taxes, right? If you don't like what you're paying in taxes, you appeal your taxes and you come talk to us. That is not actually the case. We don't control your taxes. nor do you appeal your taxes. Your taxes are set by the school board, by the fire district, and to some degree by the municipality in which you live. So if, for example, you live within the city of Bridgeton, your property taxes, your actual taxes, are determined by some combination of the school district, the fire department, and the city council. They figure out what the taxes are. I am supposed to tell you what your house is worth. And obviously, you take what your house is worth, you multiply it by the tax rate that those other folks set, and that determines the property taxes that anybody pays. So if I mess up, if I get the value wrong, then you're the person who gets an unfair tax bill. And that's not something that you want. And that is why we have a whole bunch of elaborate systems and processes designed to make sure that we do the best job we possibly can, because there are hundreds of thousands of pieces of real property in St. Louis County. And it is a physical impossibility, right? Even if all of us were geniuses, and the two of them may be, but I certainly am not. I do the best I can, but I ain't no genius. But even if I were a genius, even if I ran the best property appraisal process in the entire country, Basic Statistics 101 tells you that we still ought to get about 1 out of 20 of them wrong. Even if we were perfect in our analysis, we'd still get some wrong on the high end, we'd still get some wrong on the low end. To that end, the state of Missouri provides for a process. We can talk about it at length if you want, or if there are questions, whereby if you don't like what we say, you can appeal the value. You can show up and say, look, I think there's evidence that you're missing. For example, you may not know that my neighbor's property sold for a lot less money than what you think mine is worth. And here's why my house looks like my neighbor's. This is what it sold for. So obviously mine isn't worth as much as you think it is. Or you may not know that I have a leaky roof. You may not know that I have a condition issue with the property. You may not know that there's issues with my neighborhood. And I've got some pictures here, I've got some documented evidence. As you can see, the condition isn't what you think it is, so I'm asking that you make a reduction. That's the gist of how appeals work. It's not as formal as people think it is, but generally speaking, you show up, you present your evidence in the space of a few minutes to a hearing officer. None of this involves a lawyer. You're sitting across a table. It's sort of one human being to another. If the appraiser from my office has other information to share, they do it. That person makes a recommendation, end of story. It usually takes 15 minutes. But long before you ever get to that kind of a formal process, we always hope as much as possible. If someone has information we don't, we just want to know about it. Because as often as not, we can just take care of it on the spot. So long before we even get to those appeals, what we do is we have appraisers just sit down with people one-on-one. You call us up, whether on the phone or whether you schedule a meeting at an informal conference, and say, I've got a picture of the leaky roof, or I have evidence for what the house sold for. You come in, you have an informal conference, you talk with an appraiser, and as often as not, the appraiser says, okay, that makes sense, here's what we think the real value ought to be. If you agree with that, sign right here on the dotted line, nobody has to file an appeal, end of story. So separate and apart from everything that we're here to talk about tonight, if you look at your value when it comes out, and we'll talk about that in a second, you want to make sure that we got it right. You want to make sure that we know the correct number of bedrooms, that we know the correct number of bathrooms, that we know the square footage of the garage, that we don't think your backyard is actually a patio or a pool, right? Because if the computer has made a mistake, if the computer in its infinite wisdom thinks you have a pool and you don't have a pool, then my appraiser is going to think your house is worth more than it is. So it's really important to check that data, to take a look, to make sure that the county's got it right, because as the techies say, garbage in, garbage out. Right? So you make sure the data is right on the front end, and it's a heck of a lot more likely that we'll get the value right on the back end. And that's the kind of customer service thing that we do day in and day out. We do it over the phone, or we do it by sending someone out to take a look. You don't need to wait for a formal appeal. You don't need to feel like it's an elaborate process to go through. You're not fighting City Hall. Just give us a call. It's our job to make it right, and we strive to do that. And by the way, a little bit of context. You know, historically, the office was thought to be somewhat less good at being responsive to these kinds of taxpayer concerns. And as you may be aware, I'm the first elected assessor in about 50 years. And the reason for that is that people in St. Louis County voted overwhelmingly back in 2010 to make this an elected position for the first time since 1960. Now, north of 70% of the population of St. Louis County voted to make it an elected office. I guarantee you, north of 70% of the people did not actually vote for the red-headed Jewish guy to be your county assessor, right? So that's a useful point. Be you Democrat or be you Republican, don't matter. The people of St. Louis County presumably weren't saying they wanted Jake. They were saying they wanted an accountable official in this position who would be responsive to taxpayers, do his best to be fair, and do his best to be independent. You know, I have a vibrant and full political life. I'm sure you've seen my TV commercials and so forth. But at the end of the day, the election's over. There's not a Democratic or a Republican way to assess a house, but there is a right way and a wrong way, and that's what we try to do. So let's talk just briefly about how we get to those preliminary values, how we get to that initial number that you see, because that does get into the question of the specific concerns in this part of the community, and it will help you understand sort of what we know, what we don't know, to maybe impact things going forward. The idea is that we are supposed to come up with an appraised value of your property. And what an appraisal really is, if you get a professional appraiser, and that professional appraiser has credentials, and they have to be certified by the State Appraisal Commission, and they have to pass a bunch of tests, and they can tell you at length about the nuts and bolts of their profession. And so, Dave, at the risk of being insulting to your profession, what the professional appraiser will actually tell you if you buy them beer at the bar on Sunday night is they will tell you that what an appraisal is an educated guess. An appraisal is a substitute for an actual sale of the property. The best way to figure out what the stuff is worth, because we believe in the free market, is what it actually sold for on the free market. And so the state of Missouri tells me that I am to value your property based on what it was worth on January 1st of an odd-numbered year. What your property was worth on January 1st of 2015. The last time we valued it was what it was worth on January 1st of 2013. Now, every now and again, someone actually sells their home on January 1st of an odd-numbered year. And if you do that, great. I wish more of you would. Everybody call a realtor and try to sell your property on exactly January 1st of 2017, because it will give me spectacular data, and we'll know exactly what your property's worth. But for everybody else, you need an appraisal. You need a guess as to what it could have sold. And I can go into it in much greater depth if you want, but basically there's three ways you take a guess. For a big commercial building like this, you could guess what it would have cost to build it, and then back out some value from that because this is older than a brand new building. That's called the cost approach. Or you can try to guess what someone would pay for it based on how much money it makes in rent. If it's an office building, how much do they charge, how much money does the owner make off of it? You can back out from that. That's called the income approach. But for most property, including the homes that you and I live in, those things don't make a lot of sense. What makes much more sense is what's called the sales comparable approach, to figure out what other properties in the neighborhood that look similar sold for, and figure out how close they sold on the target date, and then figure out how much your property looks like those other properties. And that's a good way to come up with a guess as to what it would sell for. If your property has 1,000 square feet and your neighbor's property has 1,200 square feet and it's a little bit newer, and your neighbor's property sold for $100,000, then it's a pretty good guess that your home is worth a little less than $100,000. Neighbor's house is a little nicer, it's a little newer, neighbor's house sold for $100,000, so perhaps our guess is that yours is worth $82,000. That, in a nutshell, is property appraisal. Right? We can go on at length. I won't go on at length. I'm not here to bore everyone with tears. But that's more or less what we do. This is easier in some years than others, and it's easier in some places than others. The all-important thing is data. The all-important thing is sales. The more sales of property you have, the easier it is to determine what the actual value or the best guess value is for every other piece of property in the area. And this has been the giant challenge in the St. Louis region for the past 5 to 7 years, for the entire time that I've been in this job and for some time before then, which is that we've had a terrible economic crisis, and we've had a real estate crisis. And as a result of that real estate crisis, a whole lot of properties simply were not selling. And when those properties were selling, they weren't always selling in a free, open market transaction. A classic market transaction is when you call up the realtor, and the person who's buying or selling the home calls up a realtor, and the two of you don't know each other. and you guys do a business transaction, and I have a pretty good idea that you tried to get the best possible price for your home. If, however, you sold your home to your sweet Aunt Ethel, and your sweet Aunt Ethel paid very little money for it, then it wasn't necessarily an open market transaction, because for all I know, you were doing a favor for your sweet Aunt Ethel. And it doesn't follow that every other home in the neighborhood is only worth $200 because you sold your home to Aunt Ethel for $200 so she would have a place to live, right? And similarly, if you bought your home on the courthouse steps because the bank was auctioning it off in a foreclosure because, God forbid, somebody lost their home as a result of this terrible economy, and we don't know how many other people were bidding at that auction, and we don't know if the property was vandalized, and we don't know if the bank had regulators breathing down their neck to sell it off, and we don't know if some investor who is not a real person planning to live in the home but is nothing more than a landlord trying to get the best possible deal bought it. You see where I'm going with this. And during these last few years, I'm sad to say that particularly in parts of North County, we have not had nearly as many open market sales as I would like to see to have great confidence in the data. And so sometimes you have to do further speculation and further guesswork based on non-open market sales, based on insufficient data. Then comes the added wrinkle, because the good news is, thank God, those days mostly seem to be behind us. The market is coming back. Slowly but surely, people are buying and selling homes again. And if we headed out of here and we headed down to any number of parts of Mid-County or South County, there's parts of this community where we would see a booming real estate market. Right now, if you want to buy a home on either the lower end in Afton or the higher end in, let's say, Webster or Kirkwood, you know, there's plenty of homes on the market. People are buying and selling again, whatever happens to be in someone's price range. We're going to find homes selling. And that gives us more confidence about the data and whether the market is going up or down. But let me take a counterexample, and I won't take the counterexample that's front on the minds of everyone here, but a nearby one because it makes the same point. And that's homes in Ferguson. Right now, there isn't much of a real estate market in Ferguson. Now, why is that? It's not because all of a sudden nobody ever again wants to live in Ferguson. I can assure you with confidence that that's not true. And as we work our way through the terrible tragedy that's happened in this community and the awful news from last night, you know, I'm an optimist and I am strongly of the opinion that things are going to get better. We're going to find ways to come together because we have to. And at the end of the day, people are going to want to buy and sell homes in Ferguson again. But right now, very few people are doing so. In fact, very few people are even listing their properties on the market. And can you blame them? Right? Not a lot of people want to jump into the real estate market right now in an area where there's a lot of turmoil in the community and there's been some bad headlines. When that happens, it tends to freeze up the market. People tend to wait for a while before they sell because they figure if they sell, they might not get a very good price. That makes Dave's job very, very hard because Dave has to take an educated guess as to whether values have gone down in Ferguson and to what degree. If he guesses wrong on the low end, then he's sending a terrible message to the community. He is sending a message that your property isn't worth anything, that the community is falling apart beneath you, and a whole series of bad effects could come from there, to the point where perhaps banks aren't going to loan people property, to the point where it becomes harder, once again, for that real estate market to come back. And I assure you, Dave doesn't want to do that. But if Dave gets it wrong on the high end, and if Dave, in the absence of sales to work with, is valuing property based on more than what someone actually could sell it for when the market comes back, then he's taking people at a terribly tumultuous time in their lives, and he's handing them an unfair tax bill on top of it. So that doesn't make Dave very happy either. So have some sympathy for Dave and other appraisers like him who have a challenging time. I'm pleased to say that the circumstances in property near to the two landfills here is not as bad in terms of a frozen market right now as it has been in the Ferguson area, but it's not great either. There's not as many people listing properties for sale, whether residential or commercial, as I would like to see, and there's not as many open market sales as I would like to see. And to the extent there are, many of that data goes back a year or 2 years ago since the last time that we reassessed. Now this is an inherent problem in my business, and it's a problem in Clayton as sure as it's a problem in Lee May, as sure as it's a problem in Bridgeton. And the problem is that I'm supposed to tell you what the stuff is worth on January 1 of 2015, but all of my data, since the last time we reassessed, is from the entire year 2013 and the first 2/3 of 2014. That's what I got to work with. Well, think about 2 years ago. Think about when I was doing this in 2013. So we're looking at data from 2011 and a chunk of 2012, at a time when the real estate market was in the dumps. Now you knew, and I knew, that things were getting better in St. Louis County. By 2013, thank God, this economy was turning around. People slowly but surely were starting to go back to work. Good things were happening. But what we had to work with overwhelmingly was the old data, the information from the lowest point in the real estate market. And so we saw a lot of values going down because that's the information we had to work with, even though I think a lot of us knew in our heart of hearts that slowly but surely things were in fact going back up. To some degree, the world that we're in right now, with the properties in the sort of concentric rings close to and then a little bit further away from the landfills, is potentially the reverse of that problem, which is that I have a lot of data from what sales we do have suggesting that property values have been relatively stable. That's the good news for everybody out here. There is no information whatsoever to suggest that the bottom is falling out of the market, that if someone needs to sell their home in the next year or two, that terrible things will happen, that you won't be able to sell it, etc. That's the good news that I want everybody to know. The bad news is that as I stand here, I can't tell you with precision what the immediate term future is going to be, nor can I have crystal clear confidence that the values that we ultimately take an educated guess at will perfectly reflect the market. And so, again, have some sympathy for poor Dave and a whole lot of other people like him, because he has to swim a very, very narrow path, thinking about the broader community interest here. The broader community interest, number one, is not to do anything that would have the unintended impact of broadly destroying property values, hurting the values of neighborhoods, suggesting that this isn't a good place to live. Number two, you don't want to have the reverse impact, which is to hit people with unfair tax bills based on numbers that are too high and don't reflect the reality that there is some impact on property values based on bad news in the community when it happens and based on what we know. And then number three, the added wrinkle here is the office has some history in situations where there has been environmental remediation questions before, and that is this, which is that if and when there ever comes a time when companies talk about buyouts, whether they like it or not, whether they do it voluntarily or whether they get forced into it by litigation, well, where do they go to get the data? Where do they go to settle the litigation to figure out what they actually pay property owners? Well, as often as not, it comes from the assessments. It comes from the data that's put out by my office, which means that if we mess up on the low end, then what looks like a great deal on someone's taxes right now potentially looks like a really, really lousy deal if and when the checks ever come in the mail. But at the end of the day, it's not supposed to be my job, and it's certainly not supposed to be Dave's job, to try to delve too hard into those kinds of questions, right? I'm not here and you didn't elect me to try and get you the best deal possible, just like you didn't elect me to try and get the school district the most money possible, just like you didn't elect me to try and get commercial taxpayers the lowest taxes possible. I think if you've seen the kind of work that I do more broadly in the community, you know what my shtick is. My shtick is that everyone should be treated the same, whether the property's worth $50,000 or $5 million, and that the only way you can do this thing fairly is you take your best guess, you try to value the property fairly, and you let the chips fall where they may. Because sure, sometimes you make people unhappy on one side or the other, but if you're trying to get it right, you're always going to do a better job than if you try to make the most people happy. So for what it's worth, that's my sort of nutshell approach to where we're at and where I think I see things going. I think we'll have a lot more data by the time the next reassessment comes around in 2 years, and we'll also know, God willing, what comes of the litigation and what comes of everything else that's sort of above my pay grade out there in the community. That's about as much as I know right now, and now I think what I ought to do is stop blathering like I promised to do far too long ago, and instead take questions. And so I'll happily just take hands and call on people, and then I think we also have written questions that I will happily read as well. Questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question for you. First, I want to thank you for coming. It's very nice of you. The fact that you're here, I think the fact that you're here, you recognize there is a problem. Okay. Now, I guess my question is, I know you were very general. I'm here for more specifics. First, talk about, you mentioned the properties in the Bridgeton landfill area. So what is your office going to do about that? Raise the assessments, lower the assessments, or leave them alone?
So I can't answer that precisely yet, and I failed to talk to you about the timing. I should tell you that the timing is that the preliminary values are going to come out pretty soon, but we're still, what, a couple weeks away from it, Dave? Yeah. Right? And
you are aware of the problems here, right? And I don't mean to, excuse me, I don't mean to really say against your data, but I'm going to be honest with you. Nobody on my street can sell their house. Mm-hmm. I've had a house vacant for about 2 years. They just now found somebody that was willing to get in there and rent it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, unless you give your houses away where I live, so, you know.
That's really sort of part of the challenge here, right? Because to some degree you have a frozen up market. And when you have a frozen up market, that can either mean that prices are eventually going to go way, way down if nobody can sell, or it can simply mean that people are waiting to put homes on the market, or people are waiting to purchase because they're not confident in the market conditions. In a minute, I'm going to turn the microphone over to David.
One more thing.
Yeah.
It just seems to me that maybe you need to let things ride or lower the assessments a little bit for 2 years. Look at it again, because every 2 years you're going. I already mentioned this one house, nothing happened for 2 years. So here you've got a situation where wherever the assessment was, you know, back I guess in 2013, it was probably too high. You know what I mean? And so now we're going to see higher assessments, you know, coming up. I just say that
right.
You're here. Let Dave, you know.
I'll let him answer the specifics, but let me give you a little more of a general answer first, if I may. So first of all, you will see the actual preliminary values come out in a couple of weeks. And the most important thing I want to stress right off the bat is if you take a look at the value for your specific property or your neighbors and you see something that looks just crazy wrong, I really want you to call us right away, because it's going to still be a work in progress even as we have the informal conferences and even as we go into appeal season, right? You should not assume that those initial preliminary values are the final number that we're going to go with, because we are still very much in the process of collecting data, and particularly in this particular chunk of the community, because it's been so limited, because we have so many people sitting on their property and not being able to sell it, we may get more data in and be able to do a little bit of a better job. In general terms, I can tell you that I think you're right? There are parts of St. Louis County where we do see the assessments going up significantly. I don't think I'm speaking out of school here when I tell you that property is appreciating in Ladue significantly more than it is in other parts of the county. Right? And so I wish I could tell you, I wish I could tell you the exact numbers, but I'm not going to have them yet for another couple to a few weeks. But I can tell you in general terms, there are parts of this community where they're going up a lot faster than others. And I will be surprised if you see anything more than very, very modest increases in a significant portion of near in and further out North County. What I can't tell you with precision is, for any given neighborhood, right, is it going to stay the same? Is it even going to be going down somewhat? How much will the averages go down relative to 2013? And I can tell you that even less for any one person's individual property, because the circumstances for an individual property can always be different. And beyond that, the other thing to remember is sometimes we got it wrong on a property 2 years ago, or 2 years before that. Sometimes we were way too low 2 years ago, and so even if the neighborhood is going down, a particular property goes up because we're correcting bad data. And as often as not, the reverse. If we treated someone poorly 2 years ago and that number was too high, we want very much to bring it down. And so even if the rest of the neighborhood's staying about the same, somebody else's property might go substantially lower. Let me hand the microphone over to Dave and see if he can give you a little more specific guidance, because he may know more than I do at this point.
Yeah, we're still in our preliminary stages of looking at our final values for not final, but values for 2015. I assume most of you here are from Spanish Village. We did take a look at what was selling in there, if anything was selling in there, what type of inventory there is. Right now, I didn't show any active listings within the community. The last couple active listings were either canceled or they expired for various reasons. We did have a couple of 2014 and a couple of 2013 sales. In the area, I think you have around 90 homes in that community, give or take. Typically, if you have about 10% of your community selling every 2 years, you're doing pretty good. And that's still only 9 sales. We'll probably have less than that in your community because I have a feeling a lot of you, even if you want to sell, you're not sure what the situation is. The best thing for us is the fact that we do have a few sales within your community. So when you do have sales that are affected by an external influence like what you guys have right now, the ones that are selling are also influenced by that external problem, then you do at least have some decent comparable sales to deal with.
How about I read a question and then I'll go back and take another animal. Okay, is my house worth less because I live by Westlake Landfill / Bridgeton Landfill? I assume that's what WLL / BL stands for. Right, so the short answer to that is relative to an identical comparable property someplace else in town, it's almost certainly the case that either the home is worth somewhat less or it is appreciating in value slower than other parts of the county. Right? If in fact, as it turns out to be the case, as I think it will, that it's a pretty good real estate economy and that in general homes are selling for more this year than they did last year, which is the way it's supposed to be the case, it is still, all else being equal, I think we can probably agree that a $100,000 property that is close to one of the 2 landfills versus a $100,000 property in Afton or in Olivet or in, name your other community that's not subjected to that influence factor. I think any real estate professional is going to tell you that having a negative influence nearby is going to hurt, it's going to put a damper on value. Whether that means your home is quote-unquote worth less, or whether it means things are going up here more slowly than they are in the rest of the region, that's sort of the broader question. But I think it's undeniable that when negative things are happening nearby, the closer your home is to negative things happening, the more of an impact there's going to be. Yes, sir?
Yeah, you mentioned frozen communities, and then there was a brief conversation about surveying the Spanish Village. Can you explain geographically, how you determine a frozen community? How large is the area you look at? In this situation where you have homes very close to landfill, do you kind of do a concentric type of analysis, closer ones, nobody's selling, you get out 2 miles, you get a little bit of a sale, and how frequently do you revisit that so that you can tell, for 2 years nothing's sold, for 6 months nothing's sold? I mean, how specific is it? Because the situation up here is intense for the close-in neighborhoods, maybe not so much for the further out neighborhoods. If you're going to take the whole city of Bridgeton, perhaps you don't have an accurate picture of what's happening.
That's exactly right. And this is one of those situations where neighborhood by neighborhood matters more than artificial city lines, right? I can draw a dotted line around Bridgeton and that doesn't help me very much. It helps me much more to look at concentric circles around the landfill because, not to put too fine a point on it, the odor is worse the closer you are, right? So things are different in Spanish Village than they are different elsewhere. And Dave, off the top of my head, aren't there basically sort of 3 different neighborhood areas that we've looked at from inner to outer?
Yes, basically. Yeah.
You can be more specific, sorry.
Carrollton Village Apartments has had some impact, and I believe the mobile home park down here off the Rock Road and Spanish Village were the 3 main areas that we were looking at in terms of any impact.
Could you speak up a little bit, please, sir?
I'm sorry.
Could you speak up
Okay.
a little bit if you can? I appreciate it.
So that's the answer to the first part of the question. And the answer to the second part of the question is we're going to we're going to be continuing to look at this and monitor the situation because I do think we're going to get more data to work with over the space of the next 2 years. State law says that once I touch the values for this year, they're basically supposed to stay frozen in time for 2 years until we get to 2017. That's not always the case. If, for example, you did new construction, if you built a new home on a property, then obviously we're going to come and take a look to make sure that we have the correct information. Or to take a negative example, when the Good Friday tornado occurred, which by the way was what, 3 days after I took office? That was how I first got to know Dave, because we had to work to get appraisers out in the field in a hurry, right? So when something like that happens, we have limited ability under state law to go out and take another look and say, it doesn't matter that your home is supposed to stay frozen at its $60,000 value for 2 years. If you don't have a home anymore because a tornado destroyed it, then obviously we have to go and bring down the value to just the land so you're not getting hit with a tax bill at this time in your life. So depending on the specific circumstances here, it may be the case that we wind up having to touch things. I hope you don't see something awful happen that would result in massive lowering of values. That's the kind of extreme situation in which we look at it sooner. Otherwise, what you should expect is that we do our best to get it right this year. If you don't like it, you come talk to us and we do our best to make sure we agree on making it right. And then we look at it again in 2017 and hopefully we have a lot more information. Yes, ma'am?
I guess my concern, like a lot of people here, if you do that massive evaluation and lower it so bad, will we already have bad publicity which lowered it. I mean, it's like a double-edged sword. If you just say, well, Spanish Village is a lost cause because we're in the throes of the landfill and everything gets so lowered, how do you ever sell your house? I mean, how would our situation, like what they were saying back there, ever go back up? I mean, but then yet, like he's saying, you don't want it so high where you're paying a fair tax, but I just don't see how we can ever go back up to get a normal price to get out. I mean, like if you want to sell and get out, how does that happen?
Yeah, if I get it wrong on the low end, I do you a terrible disservice, right? If I put on my politician face and I say, you know what I want to do? I want to get reelected. And the way I'm going to get reelected is I'm going to give you the lowest possible taxes. So I'm going to chop all the values in half. I'm going to do it tomorrow. I gave you a nice Christmas present. Aren't you so happy? Well, no, you're not happy at all, right? Because what I did isn't fair. It doesn't reflect what actually is going on in the community. And you're precisely right. It creates a situation where the message we're sending, God forbid, is Spanish Village is a lost cause, no one can sell.
So would that affect a buyout if you would say, oh, well, Spanish Village is a lost cause, we're going to lower the price and everything, and then they come 2 years from now, like he's exactly right, they should evaluate it. Then what if they want to buy us out 2 years from now, and then they're going to look, oh, all these houses were assessed at $50,000, and that's all we're going to get. I'm just saying that is
a very real nightmare scenario.
Well, that's what we're all feeling.
If we got it wrong on the low end, and so it's very, very important to us not to get it wrong.
But he can raise the value in 2 years.
Right.
So that's kind of my point. You know, right now there seems to be a problem. Why do we pay a lot more money now?
Right, I agree with you.
There ain't going to be no buyout for 2 years. You probably might not get a buyout ever.
Right, that's why I was saying you were right. Like we should have a reprieve, but you don't want it to be put
or whatever.
like. Some neighborhoods in North St. Louis, to be honest, I have friends that moved from them. They're like a wash. They can't even, they're giving their houses away for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and you don't want to be labeled. That's what, but we need a reprieve like this gentleman is saying back here too.
I think you both, between the two of you, have precisely explained the challenges that come with getting it wrong too high and getting it wrong too low.
Well, I'm proud of my home and I keep it nice, and I would like to be able to sell it to someone in the future for a nice price. I don't want to be labeled like a dump neighborhood, but yet I feel like we're being overcharged for taxes too. So, anyway.
I hear you. Yes, sir.
I have a question for you. Exactly, obviously you don't have circumstances like this anywhere else, am I right?
I think that's fair to say.
So extraordinary circumstances like this should call for something special. So let's say you guys agree to knock it down because obviously the houses aren't selling very well, they're not going to. Most of us here, honestly, the reason why they're not for sale, I don't really want to sell my house to somebody who has kids someone down the street, the person who caused a lot of the problem during one of the lawsuits, decided to put their house up for sale right after they got paid extra money for it. And they couldn't sell it, but they rented it out to somebody who has kids. Me and my wife talked about it, and we're debating if we should put it on the market and sell it, but what are we doing to somebody else? I mean, we're very up to date on this, and we've heard a lot of the data and went through a lot of it. I guess what I'm trying to say is, are you trying to tell me that you guys can't, it's an extraordinary situation, that you guys cannot access it lower, since obviously we can't sell it? And, I mean, it's pretty plain. I mean, there's a few people that obviously, I don't necessarily say got suckered into it, but some people moved in that we know that didn't know what they were getting themselves into, and they walk through the neighborhood, it looks beautiful, it looks great, because none of us really keep our houses bad. So when you go through the neighborhood, it looks fine. But yet, they bought this at a price and basically got duped, and thinking that, hey, great neighborhood, a move in here, it's got its own park, got everything, and they bought it for a high price. At least for us, we believe it's a high price, because if anybody knows the area, isn't going to buy it. So what I'm trying to say is why is it that we can't, that there can't be an exception, since this area is an exception, to where, per se, the house values are lower, but yet if they come in to buy it, you go to Republic and say, hey, you guys are the reason why this happened, so you should pay what other people in another area pay, and just because they didn't pay those taxes at the time because they couldn't sell their house because of you, why should these people suffer for that?
So I think you're exactly right, that extraordinary circumstances demand an extraordinary response from a government agency with this job. And I mean, obviously that's why I'm here tonight, right? But more than that, that's also why the best and the brightest human being that we got is taking individual looks at properties and stuff in the neighborhood here. As I said, we have 400,000 parcels of property, right, in St. Louis, and obviously we're doing. But let me finish, if I may. There is a whole lot of less individualized review that is happening in Clayton right now. We're looking at broad trends, making sure we basically got it right, and trying to look at the overall neighborhood, and if someone doesn't like it with their individual property, then they can come and talk to us about it. When it comes specifically to Spanish Village, it's not an accident that he and his team have been spending a whole lot of time doing individualized review, because the sales data isn't necessarily telling us the whole story, right? So I agree with you completely. And part of what goes into the analysis here is the lack of sales. What does it mean? Does it suggest a marketplace that's frozen up? The lack of listings, what does that tell you? Does that suggest some sort of a discount? These are legit appraisal questions that are better answered by real human beings than they are answered by a computer. So yes, sir, that's exactly what we're doing.
Can I ask you one more thing?
We have so many questions here, so I want to try and take questions from everybody as much as I can. I live in Spanish Village. Our appraised value dramatically, I'm guessing this means dramatically rose from 07 and 08 to 09 and 10, and then again 9, 10 to 11 and 12. Also, we have heard, sorry, I'm having trouble reading the handwriting. We have heard someone is buying or trying to buy houses in Spanish Village for rental properties. Does that affect property values? So, first part first, because it's hard for me, obviously, without looking at the appraisal data for any individual piece of property, to talk about one individual person's home. What I would say is, if you think we've gotten it wrong about your home, I really want you to give our office a call, and we'll make sure that you have Laura Estes' contact information so you can reach out to us, and everyone, the team will be here after to make sure you have that. With regard to someone buying up homes to convert them to rentals, I'm going to look at you, Dave. Have you heard that rumor?
I have not.
That's not something that I'm aware of, and if anyone is aware of information, that's something we would be very, very keen to know about. So if anybody representing the group can try to find that information and convey it to the staff, I would appreciate it. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
We have children that are 1.6 miles away from this landfill that are sick daily. What are you guys going to do about that?
Other than to tell you my profound sympathy for the situation that's going on here right now, I think this might be the place where you may want to talk to other folks in St. Louis County government. I'm the guy who's in charge of the property values. I don't run the health department. They don't answer to me. I don't run the rest of St. Louis County government. So I don't want to speak for the county executive or for any of the department directors. So I know that's a very unsatisfying answer. but I'm afraid that's the best I can do. Yes, sir.
That question you read, although it's my question.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I couldn't get the writing there, developed some problems in writing here. I've got the assessed values on that, and they actually, they fell in 2008, the property value on my house was listed at $143,400. In 2009, which is 1 year after the 2008 WAD came out, it was listed at $115,900. That's a pretty drastic reduction in property values. And then again in 2011, which was right after the stench began to occur, the property values fell another $10,400 to $9,500. Those two key major reductions in value as assessed by your office are exactly the same year that there were those crucial, very pivotal areas related to the landfill. Is it authoritative to say that those drastic reductions had anything to do with what's going on at the landfill on it? Because is that just coincidence, or were there really problems in
I highly doubt that it's just coincidence, right? Because this stuff has been going on for a while, and there's just no question that it's had an impact on property values. And yours is not the only property that's been going down in value. So no, I can't look at your specific record and say A was caused by B, and B was caused by C. But I can use my common sense, and you can use your common sense, and when we can take a look at overall changes in property value and what's happening, we can say some of it happened because it was a bad real estate market. Some of it happened because foreclosures went up and people were losing their homes, and some of it clearly happened because of what was going on in the landfill and what the impact was in this community. And some of that has been reflected in everyone's property values already, but some of it probably has not, and that goes to the conversation that you and I were having just a moment ago. Does the county have lists of foreclosures, and is it available for the public to see, and is it free? So we have an awful lot of data on all sales, including both market sales and non-market sales. Sometimes it's hard to identify specifically what is and what type of a non-market sale. I know if a property was sold by a bank to a property owner. I know if it was sold by a bank to an investor, and I'm always suspicious of a sale from a bank because as often as not that's a foreclosure. But sometimes the information that's publicly reported is very good, and sometimes it's not as good as you would hope it to be. But we have an awful lot of publicly available information, and yes, it's all available to the public to see. A lot of it is readily searchable on our website. And again, if anybody wants to sort of delve in even further on your own behalf or on behalf of the organization, I'd encourage you to reach out to us or stick around and talk to Dave and Crystal afterwards. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm another Spanish Village person, and I heard your answer, but my opinion would be, I'm never going to sell my house when my family put them in a situation. We're not going to be safe for over 1,000 years, thousands of years, okay? So I would prefer my taxes to go down. Let me take a lawyer and go back the pre-problems, like in 2006, whatever it was, and I'll fight that battle in court, but I don't want to pay taxes on a home that's not worth it right now because it is not there, and I'm not optimistic like you. I don't think it's going to get better. It's going to get progressively worse, especially when they open that landfill. I mean, our values should be in the tank, and let us fight that battle in court, what our houses were worth before these problems started.
So all I can say to you is that my job is to follow state law, and that's what I'm going to do. And what I do when I follow the law is I try to value the property based on what it can sell for, based on the best available evidence. And obviously, in your community, as any place else, there's times when someone would be willing to sell, and there's times when someone would say, over my dead body, I'm not ever going to sell. Again, what I have to do is what the state of Missouri orders me to do, and what I could lose my job for not doing if I didn't do it. And that is to value the property based on what it could sell for on January 1st of an odd number year. Let me read this question, if I may. Do you, as number 30, have any influence or responsibility to weigh in on the resolution of this problem at Westlake? That's an excellent question, right? Because yes, sir.
We cannot hear you.
Okay, he can't hear me. I'll read it again.
Something that said again, please.
Do you, as number 3, have any influence or responsibility to weigh in on the resolution of this problem at Westlake? And the answer to that question is both yes and no. And I have to be very sensitive of this, right? I have a job to do as your assessor. And as your assessor, it's my responsibility to do that job fairly as the state orders me to do it. I am also your elected official. I was also voted into this job by you and by people throughout St. Louis County. And when I see right and wrong, it's my responsibility to say something about it. And so I do my part to balance the bully pulpit of my job as a politician with the substantive part of my job running a governmental agency. And I'm sure that everyone has seen that I've had things to say about subjects in this community, especially where they touch on property values. I'm not shy about stating my opinion, and I will continue not to be shy about stating my opinion. And when I see wrong done in the community, and when I see residents treated unfairly, yeah, I'm going to speak up. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned earlier that there are 3 variables involved as far as setting the tax rate. I think it's what, the fire department and the schools and the city council?
Yes, sir.
Is it allowed for let's say the township has 4 or 5 wards in it, is it allowed for the city council to have a different tax makeup for each ward? Can they do that, adjust that themselves before they give it to you, or how does that work?
I believe that the answer to that is no. Dave, I'm looking at you for confirmation. I won't swear to that, and so I'm going to ask Crystal to research this. That's probably a question for the collector's office, but I think that if a municipality sets a tax rate, and the school district sets a tax rate, that it applies within the district as
So
a
if
whole.
you've got mansions over here, you got trailer parks over here, it all goes at the same amount.
Unfortunately, I think that that's true, and I tend to agree with you that that's not fair. And it's my understanding, again, I don't want to swear to this, I don't want to speak out of school here, but my understanding, I think, is that the state law does not permit them to differentiate within the lines of the taxing district. But I'm going to ask Crystal to look into that and get back with you. So if you'll just share your contact info here so that we can get you an answer. Yes, ma'am.
I had kind of a two-part thing. The first one is kind of a statement. Realtors in our area, even if we wanted to put our houses up for sale, they have said they will not bring their clients into our subdivision. And they've been told by their supervisors, if a client wants to come in and look at one of those houses, they are not to discuss anything that's going on around here. That if someone asked, they were told, just say, I don't really know what it is. And I want to make sure you guys are aware of that they're not bringing anybody around here. Nobody wants to come around here.
And one thing that you should know is that a realtor who does that is potentially violating Missouri law and violating their professional obligations. So it's something I want you to be aware of, because there is a Missouri Realtors Commission, and if you become aware of people breaking the law and, God forbid, lying to people about what's happening in the community, I beg you, please report them to the state.
Republic Services in Westlake, they're doing that exact thing right now. They're lying about it all. I'm reporting it. They are lying.
Got
What did she say?
it. I'm sorry, there was a question she wasn't able to hear. She indicated that there are realtors who either won't show properties to prospective purchasers or are being instructed by their superiors to pretend that they don't know what's going on. And
Well, that happens like all the time.
to the extent that anyone becomes aware of evidence of that sort of thing happening, I want everyone to know that's a violation of the law, and that's something that ought to be reported. You said you had a question.
Yeah, the second part is a question. When you do the assessments on the value of our properties, are you going to only do it on houses in Spanish Village, or are you going to actually compare it to houses in other subdivisions in Bridgeton?
Well, so we compare all properties to all other properties within St. Louis County, but that doesn't follow from that a property in Afton is comparable to a property in Ladue, right? And so similarly, a property in Spanish Village might look closer to another property in Bridgeton than it does to a property in Clayton, but it looks much more closely still like another property within Spanish Village. And so specifically, this goes back to the question we had before about concentric circles. Yes, Spanish Village is different because it is closer to the landfill and has been more impacted. And so data specifically involving properties in Spanish Village, yeah, it's going to be different. Is that fair?
So you're gonna stick to Spanish Village or Spanish Village residents, or?
Again, it's a hard question to answer because it's kind of yes and no. But yes, properties are compared most closely to the ones that are right next door to them, as opposed to the ones that are a mile away. But it might look a little more like the one that's a mile away than the one that's 10 miles away. But specifically in this instance, because of the unique conditions in the neighborhood, it's going to be a lot more relevant to look at other properties right next door. Looking around. Yes, sir.
You had said that there was 2 homes that sold in Spanish Village in 2013 and 14. Is that correct?
There were 2 in 2014.
I did some analysis and I found, I believe, 2 or 3 in 13 and then 2 also sold in 14.
Do you have any data on how much it sold for?
I don't know the specifics. I know that they range from about 100,000 up to 155,000. And I believe 2 or 3 of them were in the 120s.
Did they know about the landfill?
No, they didn't. No, they just went to our neighbor, and no, they did not. They were from out of state, and they were not notified.
Oh, she said no, they didn't know.
No, yeah, no.
So is that a violation of the person that sold the house to someone?
It's possible. It depends. The situation you guys are in, I was assuming that the realtors have to disclose that. There's a disclosure statement that you have to fill out and sign when you sell your home. And an environmental concern should be part of that disclosure statement.
But they don't do that.
That's only to the property.
That's the property itself or within the house.
That's
They
it.
don't have
That's
to
right.
disclose anything
They don't
surrounding
have
it.
to serve
They
anything
don't.
outside the property
It
line.
depends.
And their code of ethics.
Again, like I
in the
said,
state
it
of Missouri
depends.
has nothing about it either.
That's why we're here. It depends.
I'm going to take this back to suggest that I think this is important information that we ought to have, and I think if there's records of these transactions, we ought to get copies of those disclosure statements, and let's make sure that your appraisers are able to read what was and was not disclosed.
But you have to be careful. Bridgeton got the Pattonville School District is number 5 in the state of Missouri for in the excellent range. So you have middle-class young families with children wanting to buy in Bridgeton. The homes that are in Bridgeton that cost over $200,000 that are behind, what is that, behind Applebee's and all those. I mean, are we being compared to that part of Bridgeton? We're being assessed, which like she's saying is unfair, because no middle-class family is going to buy. You don't understand unless you see where we live. I can almost we could drive to the landfill, walk to the landfill on the edge of it, and I'm right there. So it's unfair to be compared. We're special circumstances, like this gentleman said, and this gentleman, that.
And that goes back to my
I can't
answer to
imagine a young family wanting to buy it.
That goes back to my answer to her question. Not all properties in the Pattonville School District are created equal, right? And I'm not doing a good job if I'm suggesting that they're all the same, that everything within a particular school district is the
So
same.
the
That's
ones
not
that,
true.
okay. All
Yeah,
right.
just to be clear, I agree with you, and that's not how we do it.
Are you aware of who the new owners of the mobile home park are, and do you know of any new development that they have in mind?
I do not, but Dave may. Does anybody know the answer to that? Because I'm afraid we don't. Yes, sir.
As a councilman for the city of Bridgeton, there is no active development in that area. If there was an active development, that developer has since pulled out, and we're aware of no active developments.
For anyone who might not be able to hear, he said, as a city councilman, that there is no active development, and that there was a developer, but that developer has since pulled out. Did I get it right? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm also, I'm also a city council member from that area, and the trailer park has been sold. There is a new owner there from Colorado, and they own 3 properties here, Terrazan and the 2 Willows properties.
Councilwoman Easter says that there is a new owner of the property, and the property owner is from Colorado, and that it's one of 3 properties that they own in the vicinity. You got that right?
Not right there, but maybe down the road. I mean, down farther around, but not there.
I wouldn't think so.
I think the one big development that was thinking about doing it was scared off by the way.
All right, thanks for the information. Yeah, sorry.
I'll bring you something that I found out the other day. Chinooks, from what I understand, Chinooks is moving their facility out that's in Bridgeton down there, and they're building a new facility off of 170 down there, right on the other side of the airport. So I mean, and from what I heard from the inside, whatever it means and for whatever it is, I mean that basically what I'm trying to say is that type of stuff there. I mean, you know, that's more what concerns me is stuff like that happening. As to the question I said earlier, as if you guys, or you know, if it comes down to it and we do get bought out, if you guys can help with us or say, hey, you know, what worries me is they've dropped property value. We didn't compared to other places. So, like my original question more or less was, can ours be set because of the circumstances that we're in, and then say we are bought out, you guys can say, hey, it would have been worth this, and stand up for us at that point. I guess that's more what I was trying to ask earlier.
I see. I'm sorry I didn't get that. I guess the answer is I could sit here and promise to you that I would do my best to do that, but I know the way this has gone down in the past, and it hasn't happened at a time when I was in the job. But my understanding in, for example, in eminent domain cases or in other environmental type cases, usually what happens when the lawyers work it out is they make a deal in the courtroom or with the property owners, and that deal is based on whatever the numbers already were. And the assessor's office never gets an opportunity to
But I guess what I'm trying to say is, let's say our attorney at the time came to you and said, hey, because of this, if we have you guys saying, yeah, it would have been worth this, that's definitely going to go a long ways.
So this is a place where I take off my tax assessor hat and I put on my community leader hat. As a community leader, my job is to fight for people in the community. And if a representative of the community comes to me and says, we're trying to get the best deal possible for the residents, and it's in the public interest that the residents are treated fairly, and this is what we hope you'll do, my office is always going to do everything within its power to advocate on behalf of the people of this community, because that's my job not as your tax assessor. That's my job as your elected official who was put in there to serve you.
Gotcha.
So you'll fight Republic with, I mean, your opinion with Republic will be expressed, and we can feel confident that how you say you're outspoken, that you will talk to people.
I'm always going to call it like I see it, and I don't much care who's on which political team. Now, you know, whether in any given circumstances, whether that's what a property owner wants to hear or a company wants to hear or whoever, you know, who knows? But my job is to call it like I see it without fear or favor. And I'll give you an example that I hope will prove my credibility on that front. I have been in a big, ugly, and nasty fight for the past 3 years with one of our friendly neighborhood casinos. And on the list of big, well-connected entities that give large campaign contributions and are powerful in the legislature, I can tell you this: you don't want to be in a fight with a casino if you can avoid it. But that doesn't matter, because they weren't paying their fair share, and they were trying to get an unfair windfall. And if they were allowed to get an unfair windfall, then every man, woman, and child in the surrounding area winds up paying more taxes to compensate, and that's not right. So I don't always enjoy those fights, and there's a few others we could talk about if you wanted. We could go all night. But that's not the point. It's not my job to care how powerful or how well connected the entity is. It's my job to try and do right and wrong, or to try and do right and not wrong. Yes, ma'am.
If you become our next Attorney General, do you intend to be as vigorous in prosecuting Republic as our current Attorney General is?
So you are unfortunately alluding to the political side of my life, and I'm here in a governmental capacity with St. Louis County paid for folks, so I think I am hesitant to make statements that could be perceived as being part of my campaign, other than to tell you that in any public service job I am in, I am always going to fight to make sure the law. I am always going to fight to make sure the law is enforced fairly, no matter what, period. I'm sorry, I know that's not a satisfying answer. Yes, sir.
I just have a question about how much your office is doing to stay up to date on what is happening in general. The situation is very fluid. The fact that you guys went and looked at Spanish Village and the other close-in communities indicates you have an understanding of the situation. But every day or every week, something may happen up here. For instance, there's discussions of an evacuation plan. If an evacuation plan is actually published for a neighborhood, who who's going to buy a home in a neighborhood where there's a public evacuation plan? It's a good question. Studies are being done by St. Louis County Health. They're going to talk about it next week. Tying up illnesses in the community, potentially with the emissions from the landfill. And so my question to you is, what are you doing to coordinate with the other agencies in St. Louis County to stay on top of these things so that your response to this situation is timely? Because what I heard you say earlier is generally it's a 2-year window unless there's something specific to cause you to move in a different direction.
That's exactly right. And so you've got sort of half of the answer to the question within the question, which is coordinating with other agencies within St. Louis County. It's our job to do our intergovernmental affairs correctly and to make sure that if Public Works knows something, we know about it too. That if the Health Department knows something, we know about it too. And that's Crystal's job, and that's why she's here. But the other part of it is it's more than just talking to other bureaucrats in St. Louis County, it's also talking to you. You guys are going to know things that we are not going to know. And your city council members who are present here tonight are going to know things that we aren't going to know. And I really, really want them to be in touch with Crystal and to be in touch with Laura and let us know as the facts on the ground change, because we need the information to make sure we get it right. Yes, sir, in the back.
I'm a third councilman from Bridgeton, and what I wanted to just bring your attention is, you reviewed the areas of Spanish Village and the trailer court and other areas, and I hope you do and continue to do that on a regular basis, as the gentleman just asked me. However, I would like you to expand the radius of this study. The majority of the people here are from those areas. But I have ward meetings where people come to our ward meetings, and literally there's widows and young people that are single parents, and these people come there and they cry because they don't know what to do with their home. They can't sell it. So I would like you to go on and make sure you study an area. And I would say, in my opinion right now, the entire city of Bridgeton, from here to Lindbergh, needs to be studied, because these people, they get the smell, they know all about the toxic waste out here, they know and don't feel like anybody is doing a bit of good for them. So I would just encourage you on behalf of those people to help them and do your study, the entire city of Bridgeton and our neighbors from Maryland. They are good people that have been holding these meetings. We, and I know the council people that are here, appreciate what they're doing. And there are some other people that don't appreciate it. But we do, and that's why we're here. I thank them, and I thank you.
Thank you.
Well said, and I certainly hope I haven't for a moment conveyed the impression that I somehow think this is only a Spanish Village challenge, end of story, because of course that would not
I'm
be
glad
true.
it's finally embraced the rest of Bridgeton, because for so long we have felt in Spanish Village, in Carrollton, in the trailer park, that we are a cancer, something isolated, something that should be ostracized. Oh, you're full of baloney. What are you talking about? You're sick. Come on. Don't you? Nobody believes us. They think we're hypochondriacs. But I mean, there are real illnesses that people are suffering. Fortunately, I can say I am not one. But I have an unboundful empathy for anybody who is suffering anything with watery eyes, sick children, rashes. Come on, this is no way for a community to have to live. And I'm so glad that Ferd has said, and I've never heard Bridgeton City Council ever say that it affected anybody but this Ward 2. Never Ward 1, Ward 3, or Ward 4. But I am with you, Ferd, and I am so proud of what you said, and I feel so great that he has taken this effort to speak up for the entire part of Bridgeton, regardless of what the mayor thinks, or the next mayor thinks, or the next mayor after that.
I think that's quite all right. I think those were words that needed to be said, and I think Dawn says that she wants to address that based on the next meeting.
Yeah, I just want you all to know that Dr. Khan from St. Louis County Health Department, his assistant Arletta is in the back of the room, and so he's represented tonight. He's coming out next Thursday at 6:30 to talk about all of your health concerns. This includes radiation exposure, the brain tumors, the illnesses, and this is also illnesses and headaches and nosebleeds just associated with the odor. So, you know, you have, you know, the county assessor here, and you have your health department backing you up. So St. Louis County is really stepping up. Everybody bring a friend next Thursday because, yeah, or 10 or 20. This is really important. We've got a friendship symbol here. But yeah, it's very serious, and your health department is acknowledging everybody's illnesses. Nobody, for the first time in what, 2 years that we've been doing this, somebody is finally stepping up and saying, yes, statistically, we see that these people are sick.
And I would like not to bury another child.
I know.
Thank you for clearing that up, because let's be honest, those are the real questions, right? Yeah. That's a heck of a lot more important than home values. And that there's nothing I can say, right, that's going to even remotely touch that. All I can do is talk about property values, and that's about the most unsatisfying thing that I can do. But I hope it's been helpful. Let me, I do have one more question here, and then I think perhaps we'll call a night for this portion of the program, but we'll all be available, the team will be here to answer questions. So the question I have is, if you are still assessing house values, then why did the banks already last week send out a notice that escrow is increasing because of the tax increase? That's a really, really good question. It's a common one, and I want everyone to understand what it means, right? Because people say some version of this all the time, which is, you jerk, you lowered my property value, but my taxes went up, right? So when that happened, there may have been a jerk, but I wasn't the jerk. So in this instance, if somebody saw their taxes go up, if somebody's getting a notice that the escrow account's going up, that they're paying more money this year than they did last year, when we haven't changed the values, comes back to those three possible places, right? It's either the school district, the fire department, or the city council. And whether it was because of a bond initiative that was passed at some point, or whether it's because of a tax levy, or whether it's because the school board voted to raise rates, you never know without knowing the specific circumstances. And you're always welcome to call us or call the collector's office, and we can help you figure out what happened. But so you know, if that bottom line payment goes up, but the number from our office didn't change, that's what happened. The tax rate changed, not the assessment of your property, not the valuation from us.
So it's due to the school taxes going up, fire department, and what else?
City council.
So if they build a new fire thing, or...
Yeah, anything that they might be using property taxes to pay for. So you might want to check with your council members who are here.
Well, I know this.
And find out if there was a city tax increase or a school increase. All right, thank you all very much. I'll be available to answer your questions.
Make sure you come back next Thursday, 6:30, right here. Thanks for